Please meet my old Korg MS20 vintage analog synthesizer. Now from this picture, you can see it looks really clean and nice, considering that I bought this thing back in 1985 or 1986. And this is because I decided to refurbish it and restore it from many years collecting dust and dirt and humidity, etc. So I dedicated a few weekends and disassembled it completely, down to each component basically. I cleaned every key, every knob, every potentiometer, all the jacks and all the cards, basically individually. I also replaced all the electrolytic capacitors. Now once I reassembled it, the results were great. The synth is now like brand new. It sounds and feels great, and so of course I wanted to use it in my songs. Now unfortunately this synthesizer is so old that it does not have a MIDI interface, and therefore I cannot sequence it with my computer. On the other hand, the MS20 does have a patch bay that can be driven with appropriate analog voltages. And so clearly what I need is a MIDI to voltage converter. And there are many such devices on the market, and even relatively cheap. But most of them are not compatible with the MS20 because it uses a different control voltage standard compared to 99% of all other analog synthesizers. One module that can do the job is the Korg SQ1 sequencer, but this is relatively expensive and frankly unnecessarily complicated. So I decided to design and build my own gadget. And here is the final result. This gadget will have two pitch control voltages that normally connect to the VCO inputs of the MS20. In fact, the reason why there are two outputs is exactly because the MS20 has two separate oscillators that can be driven separately. Similarly, there are also two gate outputs because again the MS20 has two trigger inputs. Now, in addition, I also have two modulation control outputs that can connect to any of many inputs on the MS20. These outputs are the analog version of the so-called control change messages that are supported by the MIDI protocol. Note that these outputs respond only to MIDI messages on channel 1. While these respond only to MIDI messages on channel 2. Another thing to remember is that the control change number that must be used always is control change number 2, also commonly known as breath control. So to clarify, here you can connect the pitch output, and here you can connect the gate outputs. The modulation outputs can be connected in many ways as shown here. Now let us see this thing in action. We start by implementing a very famous tune that was originally done on a VCS3 synthesizer. So for this example, I'm going to drive both oscillators with the same pitch output on MIDI channel 1. However, I will use both gate signals to drive the trigger inputs separately. Here is the equivalent patch on the MS20. I need to thank Serafin Palmieri for posting a video showing this patch. As I mentioned, both VCOs are driven in unison here, and the two trigger inputs are gated separately. There are only 8 notes in the main melodic loop. Here you can see the repeating pattern in the DAW. I am using Cakewalk by BandLab. These notes are sent over MIDI channel 1. These are the notes played here at low speed. then we add another line of notes on MIDI channel 2. These are used to gate the second trigger input on the MS20 with a sound that mimics a hi-hat. Here we play everything at regular speed. I think most people will recognize the loop used in the song On the Run from the album Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. Up to now I have modulated the sound manually, but I want to show that I can automate this modulation by using a control change output. This modulation control is inputted into the synth at the high-pass filter cutoff as shown here. So here is the same sequence as before, but I added this automation line. It is attached to control change number 2, breath, but still on MIDI channel 1. So let us hear this. Note that I'm not touching the synth at all, and the modulation you will hear is totally automated. So I think this is a success. Here is another example, which is a little sequence I made up. In this case, I only have one gate signal on MIDI channel 1, but I have two oscillators being driven separately, so they do not necessarily play the same note. Also, I added two modulation signals that are controlled by automation lanes. One controls the high-pass filter cutoff, and the other the low-pass filter cutoff. So let's listen. See if you can pick out the two distinct melody lines, each supported by its own VCO. We have the modulation of the low-pass filter, here we have the modulation of the high-pass filter, and here we have the modulation of both the low-pass filter and the high-pass filter. So clearly my gadget works very well and I'm very happy with it. Now at this point we enter the technical part of this video. First we look at the block diagram for the circuit, which is relatively simple. We have a power supply that generates up to 8 volts for the pitch voltages and plus or minus 5 volts for the modulation voltages. The MIDI digital information goes into an Arduino Uno Rev 3 board, which is the cheapest one, and it deciphers the digital message and produces the corresponding analog voltage. The D2A conversion is done by precise digital to analog converters for the pitch control, but by simple PWM for the modulation voltages. Op amps are used for adjusting the appropriate scaling, and then protection circuit is added to prevent accidental damage to the gadget or the synth if the user makes a bad connection. So this is what it looks like inside. As you can see, it really isn't that complicated. This is the schematic. I'm simply going to show it here right on the video. Here is the code for the Arduino. Now you might want to design the program yourself, because I am not a very good programmer. However, if you're lazy, this code will do the job. Okay, that's it. If anyone has any questions about this project, I will gladly answer them. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you.